Good morning, everybody. My name is Nicole Williams. I'm a librarian at CUNY School of Medicine in New York City, and I will be moderating today's Love Stories panel. We will be speaking to authors about their upcoming works that feature a romantic element. And today we will be speaking first to author Holly Brickley, whose debut novel, Deep Cuts by Crown, will be released in February. Next, we have Layne Fargo, author of, quote, deliciously dramatic, unapologetically feminist novels, whose newest title, The Favorites by Random House, will be available in January. We will also be speaking with Jasmine Guillory, whose Flirting Lessons, the next book in her series set in the Napa Valley, will be released in April. We will also be speaking with author Marie Rutkoski, author of award-winning novels for young adults and adults, whose newest title, Ordinary Love by Knopf, will be released in June. And finally, we will also be speaking with author Lyla Sage, whose Wild and Wrangled, the fourth book in the Rebel Blue Ranch series, will be released by the Dial Press in April. Now our authors will give us an overview of their books, and Holly will be going first.
Hi, everyone. Deep Cuts is about a young woman named Percy who has lots of opinions about music, but no real talent for it. She meets a musician named Joe in college and starts critiquing his songs, which leads to a years-long, very complicated friendship / collaboration / romance. I like to think of it as like a Normal People meets High Fidelity. Some people have said Daisy Jones and the Six meets Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow because it's kind of that collaboration type of love story. It is a very nostalgic book because it's all set in the aughts. And I like to think it's a very warm book. It's about talent and our need to belong and our need to be heard.
Hey everybody. The Favorites is an epic love story about the very tempestuous relationship between Katerina and Heath, who are childhood sweethearts turned Olympic ice dance partners. It's loosely based on Wuthering Heights, so lots of mess. But it's got, sequins and drama and all sorts of fun stuff. So it's a lot more upbeat than the original Wuthering Heights. And I've also gotten the Daisy Jones comparison because part of the book is told in transcripts of a sports documentary. So it's sort of like Daisy Jones meets The Cutting Edge, or I like to call it Challengers, but on ice.
Hi, everyone. Flirting Lessons is about Avery and Taylor. Avery is a very buttoned up, organized person who has always wanted to date women, but never quite knows how because she's not good at flirting with anyone, especially not women. Whereas Taylor is very good at dating anyone, especially women. And so Taylor and Avery start a series of flirting lessons, and then they fall in love.
Hi, everyone. It's been so fun to hear all the connections between the different books because Ordinary Love, like some of the others that have been mentioned, is a sweeping love story that's told over time. It's about a woman named Emily who, when she was a teenager, fell in love with her best friend, another girl, and it was this passionate first true love, and that ends in heartbreak. And then many years later, as Emily is getting out of a pretty disastrous marriage, she runs into Jen, her ex, again. And in the intervening years, Jen has become this famous Olympian athlete of the kind of stature of Megan Rapinoe or Abby Wambach. And she is kind of glamorous in a way that she wasn't when they were younger. And this book is really about whether Emily and Jen can find a second chance at first love. But I also feel that it's about more than just the romantic love story. It's about different kinds of love, such as for your children and for your parents. It's about motherhood and mistakes and ambition and wanting more than what society tells you can have. I've heard it compared to the Paper Palace or A Queer Normal People. And I think that it's really exciting for me to see this kind of queer love story out in the world.
Hi, I'm Lyla, the author of Wild and Wrangled. Wild and Wrangled is the 4th book in the Rebel Blue Range series. You can technically read all of them as a standalone, but as the person whose mind they came from, I do think that they are read best together. It's a sweeping second chance love story and the epic conclusion to a series that has become so loved and that I'm so proud of. It follows our protagonists Dusty and Cam as they kind of rediscover their first love. Just like kind of Marie said, it's very fun to see the connections between all these novels, because I would also describe this as a second chance at a first love. And I would describe it as a very soft second chance. Dusty and Cam are very different. They come from very different backgrounds. But ultimately, one thing that hasn't changed for them is that they are both still each other's soft place to land. And it's beautiful to watch how that love story has evolved over the years. And hopefully they can, find their way back to each other. Just kidding. This is a romance. Happily ever afters are required. So no worries there. But it's a great conclusion to the series, and I'm excited for people to read it in April.
So thank you so much. I'm going to ask questions of the authors. This is a general question that I think several of you will be able to speak to this. And as I was reading your novels, I was thinking about, as Lyla was mentioning, seeing characters at one age of their life when they're younger, and then how they change and mature and what life, makes them as they grow older. So what is it like writing characters at such different points of their life as like teenagers, sometimes even younger children, and then as adults? And what kinds of considerations do you have to think about when you're writing somebody who the audience knows as a younger person, as an older person, and vice versa? Or, when we're talking about flashbacks, what consideration goes into that? Lyla, if you don't mind, if you kind of just sort of started to talk about it, let me ask you.
For sure. Absolutely. Sorry. I was like, I don't know. But I think the most wonderful thing about writing characters when they're younger is I think that's like the most pure version of themselves, right? It's the part of themselves and their personalities that no one has told them are like wrong yet, or they hasn't been shaped quite by the world yet. And so it's just the most pure version of these characters. And I find it really rewarding and also helpful in just character study to write a younger version of the character, to try to carry those things through, like those qualities that they have become this through line that makes the love story make sense, makes the characters make sense. But I think there are a lot of considerations to think about. Like I would write, like a first kiss scene very differently between two 16-year-olds than I would between two 30-year-olds. So it's trying to balance these love stories, ages, and then these just core personality traits of these people and make it a through line through the book. This is the first time I had done that, and it was very challenging, but it was so rewarding and I loved it. And now I want to write flashbacks forever.
I would just add to that it was very important to me to keep that stuff subtle, because I kind of hate it when characters mature in this really overt way, and somebody who has been struggled with confidence their whole life, for example, suddenly is like striding into the boardroom. And, I don't know about you all, but I'm in my 40s. I'm still dealing with a lot of the same hangups I had in my 20s. So for me, it was like subtle things like, like kissing, or like the confidence that you have, or the sort of comfortableness that you have in your own skin. And then also just being aware of the hangups. My narrator, Percy, by the end of the book is kind of interrogating these impulses that she's always had and actively working to kind of go against the grain of them, but they're still there. She's still who she is.
And the favorites, it's sort of interesting because I'm writing Katerina's point of view. She's in her early 40s looking back across her life. So even when I'm writing her as a teenager, it's through the lens of this older version that maybe is a little embarrassed about what she did in the past, or like has sympathy for her past self. But for me, a lot of the through line for both of the main characters was thinking about when they're younger, what they think is going to make them happy, what they think success looks like, and how that changes over time. Because that's really what I was going through while I was writing this book. I was reevaluating what I thought of as success as an author, the sort of author I wanted to be, thinking about, I wrote it during the pandemic, so I was, in my feelings. I'm sure a lot of us were. But like for Kat, she thinks winning a gold medal will make her happy. He thinks being with her will make him happy. And they both have to really examine that over time, like whether or not that's true as they grow and change. But it's, it's always messy.
Holly, I had a question about, oh, sorry, Marie, did you want to say something?
Oh, I
Please,
I,
yeah.
I was going to, but I was just going to say that I mean, this book, the earlier parts take place in the 90s. So some of what's going on for my main character, Emily, is just her coming into her own concept of her sexuality at a time when it's much less accepting than later on in the later parts of the book in 2012. So that's an aspect to it, but also for me, writing the young adult sections felt really natural since I've written a lot of young adult fiction. And I really wanted the writing style to kind of reflect where the character was at that point in time. And so the language itself is a little more stripped down and lonely. But also, I guess, somebody, maybe it was Lyla saying this earlier, or maybe it was Layne, that there's also not a huge shift in terms of character from when they're younger to when they're older. I really wanted this book to consider what it's like to come of age more than once throughout your life, that we talk about coming of age as if it's just something that happens when you're an adolescent and you become an adult. But I think that adults are always coming of age too as we enter different stages of our life.
Next question is for actually Jasmine. In your book, Avery and Taylor enter in this flirting lessons agreement, and I think both of them have this moment where other people have like projected their beliefs about the two of them onto themselves, and they're like reacting out of the feelings they have based on the other people's perception. So, in any other situation, would Avery and Taylor have would they have thought of this? Would they have agreed to this? And, to what extent are, and I'm trying to think about how much of a factor is other people's perception in this relationship?
So Avery and Taylor are very different people. And so Avery would not have done this if she, there's sort of a inciting moment very early in the book that causes Avery to kind of think about how other people perceive of her, and how she doesn't want to be that person. Whereas and so she kind of spills everything to Taylor, who she only kind of barely knows at this point. Taylor's always up for anything. And so Taylor, there's a little bit of a conversation that Taylor has before this happens that kind of causes Taylor to think about a few things, but Taylor would have done this anytime. Because, she has very impulsive decisions. She, thinks this is kind of a fun idea. She loves flirting, so sure, why not teach someone else how to do it? And so that's actually kind of sets up some of their personality differences and some of the things that they see in one another and each of them kind of wishes they were a little bit more like the other person.
Sorry, thank you. Holly, I wanted to ask you, I know there are playlists that go along with deep cuts, and I just had a great time looking at all the songs. A lot of them, I knew, and they took me to a specific time in the early 2000s, and other ones I'd never heard. And so it was a really great element to add to my understanding, I think, of that scene. So, do you think about music as often as, Percy does? Is it sort of kind of how you contextualize things, or is that just something that was Percy's?
I'm not as obsessed as Percy is, because my first love is fiction and books and reading. And but obviously I love music. I couldn't have written this book if I didn't love music. I'm from a very musical family, and I've never dated a boy who doesn't play guitar, annoyingly. Um, I I read like High Fidelity like 10 times in high school. Just the intersection of fiction and music has always been really exciting to me. And I felt like with this book, like, or I hoped that I would have something new to offer that tradition of the novel about music, because I wasn't really interested in writing about music. I'm not a musician. Wasn't interested in exploring the industry or fame. I wanted to write about songs and the power of songs to make us feel. So each chapter is named after a song. It's sort of structured like a literary mixtape, so that's why there's playlists. The publisher made a playlist, but then there's been like somebody on Goodreads made a 7.5 hour playlist that, like, yeah, there's all sorts of playlists on Spotify now. It's really exciting. So yeah, I was really trying to just examine and actually try to render on the page the way that music can make us feel.
Thank you. Layne, I was really interested in your choice to write about ice dancers as opposed to pairs figure skaters, which, as you mentioned, is something that people tend to be more familiar with. So why did you choose ice dance as a sport that you focused on?
Before I answer that, I'll just say I also have a very elaborate playlist for the favorites, and I had so much fun picking the songs, many of which are early 2000s bangers. So maybe some overlap there. Well, first of all, the original spark of the novel was Tessa Virtue and Scott Moyer at the 2018 Olympics. Like I feel like most of us here have seen that Moulin Rouge performance. They just have so much chemistry, but off the ice, they are just friends, so they say. I was very interested in that aspect of the sport. I think more so than in pairs, ice dance is very much about creating that intimacy and chemistry on the ice, about the relationship between the two skaters. And I was just so, like, I'm someone who has a theater background, so I've seen how that works sort of on stage, backstage. And I was curious how it would work for these athletes who are training for something so intense. But also, ice dancers tend to peak later in life and have a longer career, which both gave me more time to play with in the book, but it's just more room for drama and ups and downs and breaking up and making up and like playing out this relationship over time. But yeah, it is a much less well-known sport. I think a lot of people skip it because there aren't the fabulous jumps and throws like pairs, but I'm obsessed with it. Like, it's writing this book just made me more and more and more obsessed with it. It's I highly recommend everyone Google some ice dance programs after this.
Actually, I had a question. Were you already obsessed with it, or did you have to do a lot of research and then therefore got obsessed with it? Or a little bit of both?
I've always been into skating, and especially during the Olympics, I would just obsessively watch it, like, ever since I was a little kid. So, but I did have to do a lot of research because I was a very casual fan who was just like, pretty dress, like, I like that song. And I had to actually learn the technical aspects of it. And, but I have never ice skated in my life. So it's all theoretical at this point. My publishers keep threatening to make me do it and tape my humiliation for TikTok, but we'll see.
Thank you. My next question is for Marie. I was really struck by, especially at the beginning of the novel, where, Emily's experiencing, this really major thing in her life, and people keep telling her not to trust her perception. So I'm sure it's not the way you thought it was, or, like, it's just, I don't know. And yet she makes this really big choice kind of against what other people are telling her. They're telling her not to trust herself, but she does. What gives her the like bravery, confidence, whatever it is, to overcome multiple people telling her not to believe or trust herself and her children, and to do what she thinks is best for all of them.
Yeah, so Nicole, I think you mean the fact that she decides to leave her husband because of an incident where he throws their child into the pool. Um, this is the opening scene of the book. It takes place in the most kind of present moment of the timeline, in that it's in 2012 or 2011 actually. And her son comes running up to her and just says, "Daddy threw me in the pool." And he's clearly very scared. He's soaking wet. He's crying. And it doesn't seem like anything really dangerous has happened. She goes and she confronts her husband. And the husband says, "I was just playing with him. He was being kind of annoying. I grabbed him and yanked him in the pool, and he came right up. And why are you making such a big deal about this?" And I wrote it in this way to make it plausible that there is nothing wrong. That is something an ordinary loving parent might do. I mean, I wouldn't, but like a parent might think, "Oh, I was just playing around with my kid in the pool and he got scared. I didn't mean to. It lasted for just a second." Um, but what you see as you move back in time is years and years of Jack behaving in a way that is really manipulative and is always full of plausible deniability, where he is very loving towards Emily. He does adore her. There are many ways in which he tries to provide her with everything she could possibly want. And yet you see how controlling he can be. And so I really try to walk my reader through the psychology that's built over time so that you can understand why she's able to have a sense of clarity in that moment and to think, this is not okay. This is something I need to escape and I need to get my children out of.
Thank you. Lyla, I was really struck by how throughout like every age they're talking about, Dusty is all in on Cam. He like loves her, and I mean, it was really nice. It was really sweet. Like this guy was like so steadfast, but at the same time, he's like, an adventuresome person. He's been around the world. How did you write somebody who was like so devoted to this person, kind of over such a long span of time, and make him stand out as kind of an interesting individual and not just kind of like some lovesick sap? Because I was
Yeah.
really impressed by how he stood on his own, but you always knew where he stood with her.
Thank you. I love my down bad cowboy. But I think this is something, especially I write just traditional romance novels, right? Like I'm firmly shelved in the romance section of the bookstore. And what I think sometimes I miss in romance novels is the like, right? So not only does Dusty love Cam, but he likes her. He respects her as a person. And whether or not they were going to end up together, there's always going to be that level of like and respect. He likes the way that her brain works. He's proud of what she's done. So over the years, that love has always been there, but more than that, he just likes her as a person. And so I think when you kind of combine like love, like, and lust, you get a really kind of beautiful, sweeping romance story. And I think Dusty and Cam have always been each other's soft place to land. So when you think about like the fact that they're always so vulnerable with one another, and they're the only people that they're that vulnerable with, I think it becomes really easy to see that more than anything, they're each other's friends. And I love kind of balancing all types of love in a romantic relationship and in the relationship surrounding the romantic relationship. And so it's special to me to watch like Dusty develop on his own and has developed on his own for years. But, always knowing that he's like thinking about Cam, like, oh, I wonder, if she got her apples at like the farmer's market this week or whatever. So it was fun to write somebody so devoted, but also somebody who is just so deeply proud of his heroine at all times.
Thank you. I actually had another question for, who am I asking? All right, Layne. I had this question and I was thinking about it. I know the story is obviously about these ice dancers, but one thing I noticed, and actually maybe also in Holly's book, is like how technology changes and how that those changes in technology affect your protagonists. So we have like, clamshell cell phones, and then we go to like, the golden age of blogging where anything, went. And then you have like more sophisticated technological things. You've got grainy video. Like, I know, I'm just thinking, like, how did you think about technology over the course of this time period as you're talking about these characters and following them in different situations? Like,
Well, first of all, I had so much fun researching those old cell phones. Like there are all these websites where they have pictures of like every model of cell phone back to the beginning, and it was a trip down memory lane, let me tell you. Um, but I very intentionally chose to set the book when I did like kind of the peak of Katerina and Heath's skating career is like early 2000s to like the 2014, and I wanted to use that time period because it's like the wild west of blogging. It's sort of when there were all these gossip blogs and tabloids and stuff, but before social media had really come to prominence. Like it was a little bit at the end of that time period, before the famous people could talk back and like speak directly to their fans. They're just getting all this stuff thrown at them and they don't really have any voice in it. And I thought that would just be a really interesting thing to explore from the perspective of these people who are having this sudden rise to fame and then just a sudden fall and several ups and downs between all of that. Because they try to use it too, especially Katerina. She tries to sort of take control of the narrative and manipulate it and like use these photo ops for her own purposes. And in the end, it's too much. Like she can't control it. She thinks she can, but it's just this monster that keeps eating everything. So that was just a wild, wild time on the internet. And it was kind of fun to go back there.
definitely a flashback. Jasmine, I know you've had other queer characters in your novels, but this is, I think, the first one that really centers around a queer romance. What was it that made Avery and Taylor the couple to make their debut with you?
I've always wanted to write a queer romance, and this was like I knew Avery and Taylor were both characters in the previous book set in Napa Valley, and as soon as kind of they were on the page together, I knew that these two would have their own book. So it was really fun to kind of think about what would draw them together and why. And I also kind of feel like, this is a time when I think a lot of, and it's been for a while, but I think a lot of women are really kind of pushing back against kind of the things that society has told us for a long time that we are supposed to do and how our lives are supposed to be. And I think that is something that both Avery and Taylor kind of wrestle with, because in different ways, they're both kind of trying to be what they're supposed to be, but also pushing against it. And so they, they've crafted their lives and careers in very different ways. And so it was fun for me to explore those things and also have this great romance between the two of them.
Thank you. For the members of the audience, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A box on your screen to let us know, and we will start taking audience questions soon. Marie, just based kind of going off of what Jasmine just said, I felt like there was a lot of determinism put onto Emily because of how she looks, and everyone thinking that, her being very beautiful means that this, and this must happen in a way that she herself didn't really think about. Like, how does she push back against what people want or expect for her based on, something as arbitrary as how she looks?
I mean, there is one moment when she thinks to herself, she's aware that she comes from a disadvantaged background, and she's aware that her beauty is a kind of currency. She doesn't have money, but her beauty can give her access to a certain kind of power, including the fact that Jack is interested in her. And because she's beautiful, she's allowed to enter into this even more valuable kind of beauty, which is wealth. He's a very wealthy person. And he does love bomb her, takes her to Positano, proposes with an enormous diamond ring. But there is a moment when she thinks that her beauty is a story told about her and she's not its author. And so I think she doesn't, it's something that she doesn't, she knows is valuable and she knows can bring her things, but she's not quite sure how to negotiate society's expectations of it. And it's even more complicated by the fact that she is queer and femme and straight passing. And so there are all these ways in which she is, as a lot of femme women, including myself, kind of invisible as a queer person to most of the world. And so that's something that she navigates as well.
Thank you. And we have a question from Laura Kirk in the audience. And Laura says, this is for everyone. What is your writing process and your least most favorite part of the writing process? So anyone, please feel free to answer.
I'll
My
dive
writing
in here.
process is, oh, sorry. Do you want to
No,
go?
go ahead, Holly.
I don't really
You
have
go.
hopefully you have a more productive answer, because my writing process is chaos and obsession, and I don't recommend it. My favorite part of it is I love it and it's all I want to do. My least favorite is that it's not very conducive to a balanced life, and especially not as a mother.
I agree, like mine is also chaotic. That's why whenever I get this question, I'm ready to say like the word process implies that there's some sort of like structure and order. There's not. I'm just doing my best over here. And so my like favorite part is not drafting, it's editing, because then I can finally kind of sort through this like mess that I've created in this chaotic writing process. So I love to edit. I do not love to draft because I always mess up my timelines because I don't write chronologically because I'm a weirdo. And so everything's always like jumbled and chaotic and annoying. But
my favorite part is also the revision process, because my revision process is actually pretty organized and like methodical relatively to my incredibly chaotic drafting process, which yeah, I mean, it is just sort of throwing things at the wall. I do write chronologically, but that does not mean that I keep timelines in order or keep anything in order. And I just sort of keep like I draft in a very, I do not go back at all in a draft until I've gotten to the end. So there are times when I'm like after a first draft reading stuff over and I'm like, I wrote the same scene like 3 different times. And sometimes I'm doing this on purpose. Like sometimes I have written a scene and I'm like, that doesn't work, and just write another version of it to see what works. Sometimes I just don't even realize it. But you know, this is how and every time I'm like, why can't I do this better? But sometimes the process is that's how it works.
This is like exactly, that's probably the first time I've been on a panel where everyone else was like, I'm chaotic. Because usually I'm with people who have like a very specific writing process and I feel weird. But yeah, I'm totally chaotic. I always say my least favorite part of writing is the actual writing. Like I love to research and brainstorm, and I love to revise, but that middle part where I actually have to write the words is terrible. If I could just skip it, it would be amazing.
Thank you. And a correction, the first question was from Sarah, not Laura Kirk. We're not quite sure how that happened. On a related note, for people who are writing books in series or related novels, you know, do you read the previous ones before you start to write the next one? Or, you know, how do you make sure that this person you mentioned in book 1 has the same name in book 4? Do you keep track? How do you do this?
You know, those are great ways to do it. I don't do any of those things. I don't reread before I start writing because I don't like, you know, in at least the way that I've written my books, right? If there's a character in a previous book who is kind of the main character in the next, in the previous book, they are seen through the eyes of someone else. You know, they're someone's friend or coworker or relative or whatever. And so I don't necessarily want to get what other people think of them into my mind as I'm writing them, as I'm in their head. So I want to have, because people, like, how someone else sees you is often very different than like how you see yourself and what you're thinking in your head. And so I usually don't do that. And then after, probably like before, I mean, I go through a bunch of drafts before I send it to anyone. So I'm usually on like the fourth or so draft before I send it to my editor. So I usually try to like flip through the previous book or books before I send it to my editor to like make sure I haven't messed anything significant up. And then like usually in the copy editing or past pages portion, I try to do a much more like look through to any reference of them to make sure I didn't say like the wrong thing about where they went to college, or get specifics about what their life has been totally wrong. But I do often wish that I had like, I wish that from the beginning I had started like a spreadsheet with all the character names I've ever used, and I'm not done that.
I write like interconnected standalones, Jasmine, and this like I feel like I have created such a messy web for myself in the way that all of these people are related, but it works because I write, like Western romances against like a small town atmospheric backdrop in Wyoming. But I'm always just like, maybe I should have like planned this from the start, but it has all worked out because I love my characters and I like think deeply about them before things get started. But I'm always like, okay, yeah, for sure. There's a lot of names. All these people are connected in so many ways. And it's just a very complicated web, but it's such a fun, complicated web. And I really enjoy that part of figuring out how everybody relates to one another.
Lyla, just because you mentioned that you write like these interconnected novels and you have like this cast of characters in this small town, Graham is not going to show up as one of your hero
No.
because I don't like him.
I don't like
He's-
Graham
no,
either.
he's not a good person.
So the book opens with our main character Cam getting left at the altar by this man named Graham, and there's actually a running joke through all 3 books up to this point where people keep calling him Greg because they can't remember his name, but it's actually Graham. And so I think that like portrays my disdain for Graham, and sometimes people just get to suck, and that is their arc, which is great. No Graham.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I didn't think so, but I've seen people like, you're like, oh, this guy was the cat in this book, but 2 books down the line, he's going to be the hero. And I'm like, absolutely not. So thank you. Let me go back to my questions. Oh, another question for Holly, and this is something I noticed as I was like reading the novel. Let me go back to it. Emily talks, no, sorry, I mean, Percy talks a lot about her body. She thinks about her body, like her body in space. And I was just struck by that because, she talks about feeling the heaviness when she would want to mosh, but she can't because she has big breasts. There's moments where she's like, I have to pee. And I'm just like, wow, I really relate to this person because like, I don't know, I just feel like these are thoughts that could be like mine. Like, I can't, I don't want to mosh. That sounds painful. Sometimes you're like, wow, I'm enjoying so much of my life, but also where's the bathroom? I don't know. It's just, that was something I noticed about her, like just thinking of herself as a body in her life. Can you talk more about that awareness she talks about or thinks about quite a lot?
Yeah, it's such a good observation. And I think it's picking up on a couple things. One is just I was trying to write a very visceral first person narration. So I just wanted you to feel what she's feeling, which, includes the physical manifestations of desire, but it also includes needing to pee at an inopportune time. And so, but then there's also this sort of more self-awareness and this recognition of how her body is being perceived by others, which is a journey that she goes on throughout over the course of her 20s. And it's sort of one of those things that when you were asking about, writing people at different ages, she begins very kind of clueless about, a little bit oblivious about her body. and then goes through a period of realizing how she's perceived and how her body isn't always working with what she wants it to do, and kind of feeling some shame. And then as she gets older, she gets more comfortable and more of a sense of ownership, and gets better at just listening to her body and the cues that it's giving to her. So yeah, that was kind of that, and it's all tied up with her sexual awakening too, which is part of the story.
Thank you. We have another question from Sarah in the audience. She wanted to know if you can each tell us a recent romance novel that you read and really enjoyed. So I think we're looking for some recommendations.
I'm re-listening to The Rebel King by Kennedy Ryan right now because everybody has been telling me about the audiobook, and I love audiobooks. I've read it, I loved it, but the audiobook has been such like a immersive experience into this story that is kind of like Fitzgerald Grant and Olivia Pope coded. And it's been a fantastic re-listen. I just got off of deadline. It's the first thing I wanted to do was re-listen to this, and I'm having a great time. Also, First Time Caller by V.K. Borison, which comes out in February.
I just read Tia Williams's next book, which is Audrey and Bash Are Just Friends. And it's young adult. It's so cute. It's about, if you read 70s in June, Audrey, who is the daughter of the main character, this is her time to shine. And it's just a really fun, totally adorable romance novel that's very like full of young love, and both of them are like going through stuff. And so there's a lot of like real emotion in the book, but also these two kids are falling in love, and I just adored it. It comes out, I think, next summer. Yeah.
I love Tia Williams, and I'm so excited for that one. I'll shout out my friend Beth Cander's book, which comes out today, actually. I Made It Out of Clay. It is about a woman who has like basically everything going wrong in her life, and then one night she gets drunk and creates a golem. And he's hot, of course, and hijinks ensue. It's kind of like it's got romantic elements. It's a little more like women's fiction as well. I really loved it, and yeah, you can get it today. I'm going to her launch tomorrow, and I can't wait.
One novel that I really adore is The Safe Keep by Yael van der Woden. It was shortlisted for the Booker. It takes place in the Netherlands. I think it's in the 50s, maybe it's 1961, so it's after World War II, but you can still feel the legacy of the war. And it's about this woman, Isabel, who's very young, but it's as if she's elderly, like she's really just buttoned up, and lives alone at this house in the countryside, and she adores the house, loves the house. And her brother, who's kind of a ne'er-do-well and is always sleeping around, brings home a girlfriend and says, she's going to be staying here for 2 weeks. I'm going off, but she needs a place to stay. You're going to host her. And Isabel says, I don't want to. I don't like this person. And then the girlfriend stays, and she and Isabel begin a torrid love affair.
That was mine. You stole mine. It is so good.
So good.
So good. I know the question was romance novels. That's probably, yeah, that's more as close as I'd get to reading a romance. Just like since you took mine, I guess I'll say that somebody who does not need a shout out at all, Sally Rooney's latest one, I really loved. And it's so sexy. It's more overtly sexy than her previous books, I think. So Intermezzo, if you haven't read it yet.
Marie, what was the name of that title again?
The Safe Keep by Yael van der Woden.
Thank you. We had a question in the chat. So we are close to wrapping up. We're almost finished. May I ask, I know we're talking about your upcoming works that will be published in 2025, but what are you working on now? Tell us. We would love to know. What should we be looking out for from you all?
I just turned in the first draft of the start of my next kind of duology called Sweetwater Peak. I call it my like contemporary take on a Western Gothic romance. So I'm staying kind of firmly in the Wild West, but with ghosts this time, which I'm really excited about. I'm just inching toward my publisher letting me write about vampires. So I'm just adding in more paranormal elements as I go. But I'm very excited, and that will be coming your way maybe also in 2025. We'll see.
I am also sneakily writing about vampires.
Has the
My next book is about a Broadway musical, sort of like over time, like the original production and a revival that's happening in 2022, and several different women who've been involved in the production in different capacities. But the fictional musical itself is about the forbidden romance between a female vampire and a hot priest. So I had to.
Feel free to send that to me anytime.
Holly?
Oh, yeah, so I'm writing another book about a very outspoken, obnoxiously opinionated woman. So maybe I have a thing. But this time it's instead of music, her obsession is climate change. So it's a little bit darker and heavier, but but still a love story. She meets a Mormon man. So similar kind of hot priest vibes. And they have a very contentious attraction.
Thank you. Well, we've made it to 3 minutes before we go. I actually just have one last question, and this is just let us know. What is your favorite thing about your book that we talked about today? So your upcoming release, tell us one thing that you're super proud of or that you love or you think, what do you want us to know about your book besides the description, which you've already given us?
I loved writing the flirting lessons themselves, especially kind of in the early stages because Avery and Taylor don't know each other very well. And so they're kind of getting to know each other while Taylor's kind of making Avery do things that she doesn't really want to do. Like she said that she would do this and then has a lot of regrets at the beginning, but she's sort of trying to do it and is nervous about it. And they're both attracted to one another, but they're very different. And that stuff was very fun. It was like fun to navigate them kind of going out in the world together and like talking each other through this stuff that neither of them really kind of knew what they were doing. And so that was very fun for me.
Yeah, I would say the joyfulness of it. And I also really always want people to know that if they're like, I think some people think that it's going to be a book for like real music nerds, and that if I'm not a music nerd, I'm not going to like it. And so I would just like everyone to disabuse themselves of that notion if they have had it, because I think it is a very accessible love story, and that's the primary part of the book.
I have the most fun writing the favorites, doing the like research and world building. I really wanted to create that sort of immersive story like Taylor Jenkins Reid writes, where it's like, it feels so real. You think you should be able to look these people up on Wikipedia. And I've had a number of readers tell me that they were like, I wanted to go to YouTube and find one of their skating programs, and then I remembered they were fake. So that's what I'm the most proud of. And I hope it'll be like a great escapist, fun read for people in our current moment.
Maybe something that I might want people to know is that the book, it's not a retelling of Jane Austen's Persuasion, but it is very, very loosely inspired by it in the sense, as maybe all second chance romances are, since that is kind of the founding second chance romance of Western literature. But I just thought that it would be really fun to write Captain Wentworth, but as a woman, as like a woman who is kind of like come back, and that's Jen, the love interest. So, you know, she's come back into Emily's life, but like Captain Wentworth, she is far more powerful. She is desired by other people. She has really come into her own in a way that is surprising.
For me, I think I really pride myself on writing really immersive romance novels, and a lot of that immersion and atmosphere comes from the setting, but also from the side characters. And so with this being the last book in kind of an interconnected standalone series, for me, it was such a joy to have all of the previous characters like cheering and sometimes like pushing these two towards their happily ever after gently. Sometimes not so gently, but it's such a joy to like bring everything together and answer questions that people have had through 3 books and just see everyone kind of find their way back home, because it's always going to be there when it's waiting for you if you need it.
Thank you all so much. It's been great to speak to you about your upcoming novels and to hear more about your process. And, you know, it's been really enjoyable. Thank you all to the audience who joined in, who asked questions, who left us great messages in the chat. And that will be it for us.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.